Well, welcome to the ceasefire. Don't get excited. This is not the end of the war. This is not peace. This maybe isn't really even a ceasefire, and it's not going to last. This is the Megalopolitan Podcast. I'm David C. Fisher. Last week, it was all fire and brimstone. It was all deadlines. On Tuesday evening at 8 o'clock Eastern, we are going to bomb Iran back into the Stone Age unless they open the Strait of Hormuz. We're going to bomb the power plants and the bridges and the production facilities and just wipe out Iranian civilization. But at the last moment, with about 90 minutes to spare, Donald Trump on Truth Social announced that there would be negotiations. There was reason to believe that there were negotiations to be had, and so a 2-week ceasefire was announced. Well, the negotiations have failed. The ceasefire is maybe still on, maybe it's not, and all the old problems remain. The Strait of Hormuz is still being toll-boothed by the Iranians, and the real risk goes back to what it has always been in this war, which is strategic impatience. Here's an update on the state of play. So the ceasefire was declared. It was to be a 2-week ceasefire pending, negotiations, which lasted a day, Friday to Saturday of this week. Whether the ceasefire lasts is unknown. Negotiations took place in Pakistan. 71 Iranians showed up for some reason with maximalist demands. The United States had the maximalist demands of their own, and the reason for the ceasefire in the first place was really kind of a mystery, since nobody had anything really to talk about. Iran is still engaged in selective passage of ships through the Strait of Hormuz. They're extorting tolls from the favored nations they allow to go through. The air campaign is on hold. There is a ceasefire, at least for the time being. But going into the ceasefire, the air campaign had shifted substantially from military targets to IRGC targets and regime targets. And the regime is still showing some force. They shot down an A-10 Warthog, which is not easy. They shot down an F-16 Eagle with 2 American service people parachuting to the ground in Iran and having to be rescued by a rather amazing American rescue operation. Fighting continues in Lebanon between Israel and Hezbollah. The Iranians are arguing that that's a violation of the ceasefire, but it was already announced that would not be included in the ceasefire. So nobody's agreeing on anything. So what are they negotiating about? Iranian proxy forces are still being supported. Gulf neighbors are still being attacked. And the Iranians are signaling that the Houthis may start attacking the Red Sea Strait. So this may become a 2 choke point oil transportation war, with the real victims being international commerce. So the ceasefire. There's not necessarily any reason to believe that the Trump administration was really ever talking to anyone. There were deadlines issued. They were extended. They were extended again. And on the last day of the last deadline, going into that day, there was threats. There was fire and brimstone. We're gonna wipe out Iran. And then at the last minute, there was a ceasefire announced and negotiations. It sounds like really a Trumpian negotiation technique: pressure, 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 and then the offer of an out. And the Iranians, to the extent that they didn't want their country bombed for 2 weeks, they played along, I think, and showed up in Pakistan and said what they've been saying all along. We're not giving up anything. We want reparations. We want America out of the Middle East. A list of 10 things that, none of which are going to happen. And the negotiations collapsed in a day. The American side took it seriously. All the full negotiating team went. For some reason, the Iranians sent 71 people. And who they are, who knows? I mean, we do know who they are, but so much of the Iranian regime has been degraded and assassinated and decapitated that we don't really know who's in charge of what, and whether or not much of the attack activity is in anybody's charge. The ceasefire was announced, and there were missiles flying and drones flying for days afterward, and whether that was under orders or by local commanders or by whom, nobody knows. We don't have any visibility into Iran. So who's speaking for whom is unknown. And the Iranian regime is in a position that they really can't be expected to concede much at all. I mean, it can be demanded, but like the Nazis toward the end of World War II, there was no negotiating with the Nazis. The Nazis never tried to end the war by negotiation because they had done too much. They had gone too far. They had committed atrocities. They had killed too many people. There was no them living in that country after losing a war. And that's almost certainly true of the IRGC. They can't normalize Iran. If they normalize Iran, they are done for. They are villains in Iran. They rule and they exist there only by force, and that force is resented, and it's a historical resentment. And they're not going to be seen conceding to the United States, and they're not going to be able to give up things like their military power with limits around it, or their nuclear ambitions, or their support for proxy militias overseas. They've got to go down with their ship, very probably. So negotiations are not going to work with the IRGC. And I think everybody knew that going into these negotiations. So we're back to somewhat where we began. The air war and the issue at the Strait of Hormuz is the shape of the battlefield. Something has to be done about both. There's the IRGC, there's the regime, there's the Strait of Hormuz. And the Trump administration is now saying that we are going to blockade the Strait of Hormuz. We're just going to stop all ships from moving through that strait, whether they're approved by the Iranian regime or paying toll or not. Nobody goes through because we don't want to empower the Iranian regime with income. We don't want to, oil going through international trade and this toll income that they're charging. So the new idea of the Trump administration is to stop all trade of all kinds. Which would punish Iran, but it would also, punish the world with higher oil prices. Because the fact is that even if just Iran and the nations that Iran approves paying toll are moving through the Strait of Hormuz, that's maybe 2, 3, 3.5 million barrels a day, which is it's not the 20 million barrels a day that were moving through the Strait of Hormuz before, but it's enough that it keeps sort of a lid on how far the oil prices worldwide can spiral. You blockade the Strait of Hormuz and you're just locking in this amount of oil is not reaching markets until further notice. And that's going to be expensive for everyone, the United States included. Now, as Donald Trump will love to say, the United States is energy independent. We make more oil and gas than we use, but it's still subject to the pricing of the world market. We will not have shortages. We won't have rationing, but we'll have very expensive fuels. And that's very bad for us and for everyone. So this blockade, although you can see the impulse, punishing Iran, taking away their income, it's not effective and it's not a permanent solution. The permanent solution remains. And what's going on is this long, gradual learning process What needs to happen is now or soon or eventually, the regime has to go. This has always been a regime change war, and nobody wants to say it because historians and military people are going to say, oh, that's pie in the sky. You can't change a regime with an air war. Well, once we embarked on this war, we embarked on a war that's got a life cycle. This war is going to last as long as it lasts. And the United States and Israel cannot walk away with a Strait of Hormuz that's in the control of the IRGC. We can't just walk away with an IRGC in charge of Iran, free to simply rebuild its missile fleet and rebuild its nuclear program and do all the things that made it a threat to world peace for 47 years. What we can do is continue the air war, continue harassing and pressuring and squeezing the IRGC for everything that it's worth, which we can do with the end in mind of the removal of that regime. It may take years. I mean, that's something we have to admit to ourselves. We have taken on. The regime has to go. An air war takes a long time. In Kosovo, it took 78 days to get Slobodan Milosevic out of Kosovo. In Libya, it took 7 months of air war, of bombing, with local boots on the ground, rebel groups on the ground. That took 7 months. We've been in this for 6 weeks. It's not surprising that the regime, decapitated though it is, reduced though it is, weakened though it is still in charge. They're on the streets. They've got the guns. The people don't. So the shape of the battlefield, as it has been for some time, and we just got to admit it, is we need to reduce the capabilities of the IRGC on a day-to-day basis with an air war countrywide, and we need to forcibly liberate the Strait of Hormuz. May not be easy, but it's something that allies will help us with if it is for the good of the world, and it's a defensive reaction to the Iranians illegally seizing an international waterway. And it is doable. So the air war, the air war is, it's pivoting. I mean, the air war is on hold right now because of the ceasefire, but it is pivoting toward preventing the IRGC from being able to do what it does. And it's telling that the western half of Iran, which is closest to Israel, closest to the, where the U.S. Forces are launching and so on, the air war has so successfully degraded the missile and drone capability in the western portion of Iran that the air war pivoted to blowing the bridges that connect eastern Iran with western Iran to keep western Iran from being resupplied with the missiles and drones that are within range of our carriers and Israel. So concentration works. Concentrated effort on a zone of Iran works to the extent that it's now a matter of blowing bridges and preventing lateral transportation of armaments. Concentration on the south, abutting the Strait of Hormuz. Yes, it's an air war, but layered, multi-dimensional satellites, drones, AWACS planes, combat air patrol, mine sweeping, mine detection, maritime interdiction. The Strait of Hormuz has to be secured. An enormous job, a complicated job. We can do it. We can get allies to help with us. But it's going to take a while, it seems, for the administration to get their mind around having to do this. We have to do both. We have to make a concerted effort to knock out the IRGC, to bring down this regime, and at the same time, because the regime may take a long time, liberate the Strait of Hormuz. Uh, so the Iranians have. It's surprising it took them as long as it did to realize that the Strait of Hormuz was so easy to close, so easy to harass commercial shipping, that they could basically stop shipping, with just the threat alone of mines in the water or drones that might be launched or missiles. And they attacked a few ships and just made everybody know that they're serious. That they realized that it wasn't that hard to control the Strait of Hormuz, and so they've instituted this toll system, which is not surprising. I mean, that's totally predictable. And they're only allowing certain nations to run ships through the Strait of Hormuz. Oil transport, commercial goods, fertilizer is a huge problem because it's planting season, and there could be real food problems because of the problem getting fertilizer through the Strait of Hormuz. And so they're exacting toll, and one number that you hear around is they're charging $1 per barrel of oil being shipped by a given tanker. These tankers, some of them carry 800,000 or 1 million barrels of oil. That's some income for the Iranian regime, and that's what President Trump is responding to with this blockade. We're going to blockade the Strait of Hormuz. We're going to prevent Iran from making a cent. And that, you see, that says things that maybe they don't realize it's saying. That cuts off Karg Island. That cuts off the need to land any troops there or to land any troops on the Iranian mainland. There's this sideways, sidelong implication that the boots on the ground was maybe never going to happen, because that really is too much of a problem. Putting boots on the ground just turns a sustainable war into a quagmire. It turns it into Vietnam. It turns it into an endless slog with 1 million problems to solve once you have boots on the ground, other than the assignment that they have. You put them on the ground to root out the missiles and drones, but they've got to defend themselves. They've got to secure population centers. They have to occupy land. They have to set up perimeters. I think there's a tacit admission that boots on the ground was always only a threat, and it's worth really hoping that is so, because a land operation is a disaster. And if you think the air war has been going on a long time, if you think 6 weeks of air war is like, why are we still in this fight? If boots go on the ground, we're going to be in it for years, and that's predictable and knowable and unnecessary, because we have what we need to pressurize Iran and liberate the Strait of Hormuz. But doing those things means it's not going to be over in a week or 2 weeks or another month. It may be many more months. It may go into the midterms, which, I'm sure is a factor in all of this. But 20% of the flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz, financially makes it worthwhile. If it costs $1 billion a day to keep the Strait of Hormuz open, that's worth it for 20% of the world's supply of oil to flow freely. And allies will likely help with that. I don't think NATO is as offended and in danger as a lot of people are saying. Donald Trump, he gets frustrated. He says the quiet part out loud. Other presidents would grumble a little bit, and there'd be a little implication about maybe NATO isn't terribly helpful in this particular case. Donald Trump just says it out loud. Why are we in NATO? Why don't we just quit NATO? We don't need anybody. We don't need you. We don't need it. That's the old take Trump seriously, but not literally. NATO is the greatest security alliance in the history of mankind. And as frustrating and disappointing as allies may be, my goodness, there are 30 members of NATO now. We're bound to disagree, but we can agree on one thing, which is the thing that NATO was made for and designed for and intended for, and that's Russia, stopping Russia. We can all agree on that, I think, especially, by the way, with the newly elected Peter Magyar in Hungary, which, even though Donald Trump thought that Viktor Orban was the greatest guy ever, the election in Hungary, the new guy replacing Viktor Orban, is a very good thing for Europe, for NATO, for the United States. The real risk going forward is strategic impatience. You can't be in a hurry. The war in Iran was always going to be what it was going to be once the missiles and the bombs started flying. The IRGC it's deep, it's embedded, it's sophisticated, it's got its fingers in everything in Iran. It's not really knowable what it'll take to dislodge them or isolate them or break them with the Artesh or get the people of Iran to rise up against them. It's really unknowable. But in this situation, you have to go the distance, and you have to clear the Strait of Hormuz for commercial traffic. The real risk is this political pressure in the United States, this strategic impatience. We got to get this over with. Why are we still in this? I mean, I am sure Donald Trump is thinking, I said this would last 4 to 6 weeks. We're now at the 6-week mark. Well, you shouldn't have said 4 to 6 weeks. This is going to take the time that it takes. And there are a million lessons. A very good one is Korea. In the Korean War, the United States participated very substantially in the Korean War when the communists of North Korea were taking over the democratic capitalist South Korea. The United States, along with the UN, intervened and expelled the North Koreans from South Korea successfully. Douglas MacArthur was the head of the American forces. And once they got the momentum and they drove the North Koreans out of the South, the thinking changed. The ambitions changed. Well, maybe we can drive the North Koreans completely out of Korea. Maybe we can take over all of the Korean peninsula and liberate it for freedom and democracy and capitalism. Well, the Chinese had warned us not to do that. And Douglas MacArthur, and to an extent Harry Truman, decided that wasn't a genuine threat. And the North Koreans were pushed all the way to the Yalu River, the border with China. The Chinese made good on their threat. The Chinese invaded in massive numbers. And, we, the United States and the UN, found ourselves fighting the North Koreans and millions of Chinese. And the war went on for 2 more years and ended up with a ceasefire in the 38th parallel and no end of the war at all. 75 years later, we're still there. That strategic impatience, that political pressure, you can't respond to that. You have to set your sights on the strategic goals that you went into the war to achieve. And if the strategic goals of this war necessarily included that it be over in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month, then it was never a good idea. Iran is a threat and was a threat and had this coming. But you've got to ask yourself, is it worth what we're getting into to solve the problem that Iran is? The United States and Israel decided that it was worth getting into. But what we're into is going to take time. And if we leave before that time completes the task, then it will really be a failure. And that's the real risk. The insistence that escalation of some kind is needed to make this happen faster. Because, there's no need for that. Time is on our side. The Iranians are quite sure that time is on their side, but they're wrong. They're losing every day. Now, during the ceasefire, maybe not. Maybe, they're rearming and repositioning and moving things around and hiding things in tunnels and camouflaging things. They're learning from the war so far, and they're adjusting. They're using the time. We're using the time too. We've got satellites in the air. We're watching everything. We're adjusting what we're going to be doing once the air war starts again. It will start again. But the Iranians the Iranian regime is not correct. Time is not on their side. Unless they think that we will tire, get discouraged, get impatient, decide that somehow, maybe we'll win the midterms if we leave now and pretend the war is over, or some, crazy thing like that. It would be the first time that an opponent figured we're not in it for the long haul. And we need to be, because the war will take the time that it takes, and there's no getting around that. So the major threats are past. The deadline has passed. The ceasefire is on. The negotiations are on. The negotiations are off. The ceasefire is still on, I guess, sort of, but it'll be off soon and for a while, and we'll have to see how things go from there. This is the Megalopolitan Podcast. Thank you for joining me. See you next time.